Her dog licked her and she lost all 4 of her limbs. In May of 2019, Marie Traynor returned home from a Caribbean vacation with her husband. Since they were away for several days, their dogs were extremely excited to see them again and kept licking them non-stop. But by the very next night, Marie suddenly started feeling sick. She developed flu-like symptoms like nausea, body aches, and a fever. At first it didn't seem too serious, but her condition got worse, so her husband rushed her to the emergency room. Doctors soon discovered that Marie had developed sepsis, which is the body's extreme response to an infection, and her organs were starting to fail. Her condition got so severe that doctors placed her into a medically induced coma. Large blood clots started forming throughout her body, cutting off blood flow to her arms and legs. In order to save her life, doctors were forced to amputate all 4 of her limbs. Marie spent 10 days in a coma, underwent 8 surgeries, and spent nearly 80 days in the hospital. But despite everything, she survived. Doctors later discovered that bacteria from one of her dog's saliva had entered a tiny scrape on her arm. Bacteria was identified as capnocytophaga, which is a rare infection that can sometimes be extremely dangerous. Even after everything that happened, Marie and her husband said they do not blame their dogs at all.
This woman just got arrested for attacking her boyfriend with a hatchet while he slept, but what she does after is insane. So her name is Lina de Oliveira. I hope I'm saying that right. She's 23 and living in North Dakota with her boyfriend Jonathan. Now, I was a bit confused about their living situation because some reports say that Jonathan and Lina had no steady home, which basically means they were couch surfing. But what is clear is that on that night, they were sleeping in a detached garage with another man who has not been publicly named. For the sake of this story, we're just gonna call him Bob. Anyways, one random night in September of 2025, while everyone is sleeping, Lina decides she is going to unalive her boyfriend. Why? We have no idea. But for whatever reason, she grabs a hatchet, and don't ask me where she got it, it was just there, and starts swinging it hard. The first blow goes right into Jonathan's head, and he wakes up screaming in absolute pain. And he was so loud that Bob, the other person in the garage, wakes up and sees Lina mid-swing about to strike something. He just woke up, so he can't really see what's going on. And at first, Bob honestly thinks that she just hit the bed frame because the sound was so sharp, it sounded like splinting wood. But when he rushed over, he saw something way worse than a busted headrest. There was a deep mark on Jonathan's skull. There was blood pouring out, and his fingers, not to get too graphic, but let's just say some of them were gone, or just barely hanging on, because Lina didn't stop at just one swing. As she was swinging the hatchet, Jonathan lifted his hands up to his face to protect themselves, and unfortunately, one of those strikes nearly severed his fingers completely. And before Bob could even get to her or ask her a question, Lina turns around, drops the hatchet, and rushes out of the garage. But eventually, the cops did get called that same morning, and what they walked into is flat out horrifying. They find Jonathan, who is in very bad shape, by the way, and they have paramedics rush him to the hospital so he can get emergency surgery. Meanwhile, the officers stayed back so they can lock down the garage. As they start taking pictures and collecting evidence, they notice a trail of blood leading away from the garage. And they're thinking, whoa, this could be a potential clue as to where Lina ran off to. Because right now, nobody knows where she is, what's going through her head. Could she hurt someone else? Could she turn on herself? No one knows. So Fargo police kick off a full-on manhunt right there. And just 2 days after the incident took place, Lina was found and arrested. But the thing that really throws people off is that when they sat her down to take the mugshot picture, Lina is smiling with a huge grin on her face. And it's like, so after you did all of that, you're just smiling like it's a yearbook picture? I'll be honest, that is very odd behavior. But in the end, prosecutors hit her with attempted murder and aggravated assault. And just for the cherry on top, the judge slaps her with a $500,000 cash bond. So yeah, there is no getting out of there. As of right now, that's all I have on this case. It's still very new, and we don't even know what Jonathan's condition is, but I truly hope he's okay and makes it out alive.
It was August 2015 when Kathy Finch got home from work, and it was a very ordinary day apart from one thing. She got in, she dropped her bags down, and she said hi to her husband David, and then they both glanced out the window. And suddenly they felt sick to their stomachs. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Why had somebody dug a grave in their back garden? The pair lived a normal life in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, all of my Breaking Bad fans, we know Albuquerque. And this couple were absolutely lovely. Kathy was a doctor and David was a computer engineer, and they'd do anything for anyone, especially their son James. But James wasn't a normal child. Ever since he was very tiny, everybody just knew there was something different about him. He'd been kicked out of 2 nurseries by the age of 2. Like, if that's not a red flag. He did get diagnosed with ADHD, but it was more than just that. that, people around James just knew that there was kind of like a darkness about him. As he got older, his parents struggled to cope. He was getting more and more like a rebellious teenager, experimenting with substances and even hanging out in gangs. Kathy and David knew that he had this substance issue, so they decided to fork out a hell of a lot of money to send him to rehab. But sadly, it didn't help. After paying thousands, James came out of rehab with still the same meth problem. He would get into fights, he would shoplift, and obviously get in trouble with the law. Now, these guys were in their 60s by now, and they were scared. James was a big 24-year-old man. They had no choice but to kick him out, and they even had to get a restraining order because he just wouldn't give up. He was harassing his parents. He would show up, he would physically attack them. Their nerves were shot to bits. Like, honestly, they were nervous wrecks. Terrified of him, they started changing all the locks on the doors. They installed a security system. They had this big fence around their garden, but nothing seemed to stop him. David, bless him, even went round every single house in the neighborhood warning every single person about his son. But the couple breathed a sigh of relief when he ended up in prison. He'd assaulted his girlfriend, and they honestly thought that finally he was getting his punishment and he was going to be behind bars and he wouldn't be their problem anymore. But he didn't stay behind bars for long. When he was released, this grave suddenly appeared in the couple's backyard, and they were just like, we know this means trouble. It felt like some kind of chilling warning. As you can imagine, they struggled to sleep after that. I mean, I would be sleeping with one eye open. Just a few days later, James returned. It was 4 a.m. on the 24th of August when the couple were jolted awake by the sound of like a crack. Somebody was in the house. Before they could even comprehend what was going on, a man was in their bedroom with a knife. A desperate call came in to 911 screaming for help. It was Kathy. Officers raced over there. They couldn't get in through the front door, so they went round the back and they saw a trail of blood. But they were still not fully prepared for what they were going to find in that house. A naked man in just socks, hiding underneath a see-through glass table. I don't know who in their right mind hides under a glass table. It was James, and he was covered in blood, screaming. He shouted, "They're trying to kill us. They're trying to kill my parents. Please don't leave me. Please help me. I don't want to die." And they raced up to the bedroom. They realized it was all a lie. Kathy was lying in a pool of blood, and David was right beside her. By some miracle, Kathy was still breathing. But David was not as lucky. He was face down with more stab wounds than they could count. Next to him was a 7-inch knife. Kathy screamed that the killer was James, not a random person that he seemed to be insinuating. Police grabbed him, they cuffed him, and they took him off for questioning, and they raced Kathy to the hospital. Now, firstly, in David's final moments, it just showed what a true gentleman he was. He was more concerned for his own wife's safety than his own. He was screaming to her, "Run before he gets you." James remained the spineless person that he'd always been when he was interviewed by police. He made up some rubbish story that 3 men in masks picked him up from the homeless shelter and forced him to kill his parents. Police quickly debunked this story and realised that it was about as stupid as him hiding under a glass table. Kathy thankfully did survive the brutal attack, but was left permanently disfigured. She had to learn to walk and talk again. And that was the thanks that she got for raising this child, for the money, the care, the time, the effort that went into raising him. James ended up getting only 27 years in prison, which to me is absolutely appalling. Taking your own dad's life and trying to take your mum's life too. For more cases like this, I post deep dives every single week on my podcast, The Born Investigation.
He could have went on to become one of the most deadly, barbaric, sadistic serial killers. Thank God he was caught when he was, because the 2 murders that he already committed were absolutely horrific. Before watching, please be warned that this is an extremely graphic case. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murders of Christina Benjamin and Brian King. In the early hours of the 27th of July 1993, Father James King would be awoken by a car pulling up to his house, beeping twice and then driving off. A short time later, the tan-coloured car would return and actually parked up outside of his house. This was in Ellis County, Texas. James decided to go down to the front door to investigate, and he would see that his 14-year-old son Brian was talking to the people inside of the car. James decided that while he was awake, he was going to quickly pop to the toilet, and by the time he got back to the front door, both Brian and the car were long gone. He would wait up for around about an hour to see if his son was going to return, and when he didn't, James decided to just roll over and go back to sleep. When he woke up a couple of hours later though, he would discover that not only had his son Brian not returned home, but his stepdaughter, 13-year-old Christina, was also gone. James and his wife Donna, who was Christine's mum, decided not to call the police straight away. They weren't going to worry, they were going to sit and wait it out to see if the children returned back home. However, they never did, and so they were left with no other option but to contact the police to report Christina and Brian missing. 2 days later, police officers that were searching a field in nearby Toledo, Ellis County, would make a horrifying discovery. They found the headless body of a young girl, a girl who we now know was Christina. She was found completely naked, and both her head and her hands had been chopped off, likely to make identification of the body much more difficult. She had been horrifically, sadistically mutilated. She had what was described as an autopsy-like slit down her stomach. She had been disemboweled. Her killer had removed some of her organs, and her remaining internal organs were exposed through the wound. Her private parts had been mutilated, and she had 2 gunshot wounds to her back. Some other officers would continue their search of the field, hoping that they would discover this young girl's head or maybe even her hands, but instead they would find a second body, and that was Brian King, who had been shot at point blank range twice in his head. I wonder if the killer had done this because they knew that Brian would have done anything to protect his sister. Christina's dismembered remains were never recovered. Through intense investigation and DNA, police were able to narrow down their suspect pool to one person, and that was 20-year-old Jason Massey. Jason Massey had a criminal record about the length of my arm. He was a very dangerous individual even at the young age of 20. His mother, who had neglected him throughout his childhood, she was an addict, admitted him to a mental health facility after she had read some terrifying entries in his personal diary. He would write about idolizing serial killers, especially Charles Manson, and he wrote about his own aspirations to become a serial killer. He wanted to become a, quote, murder machine targeting young girls, and he even had a list of all of the girls that he wanted to target. Just imagine realizing that your name was on that list. The thought of torturing, mutilating and murdering these young girls would get Jason aroused and excited. This was obviously terrifying to his mother, who knew that he was capable of such evil things. He had already been doing stuff like this for years at this point. Jason was a serial animal abuser. Cats, dogs, cows would be murdered and mutilated by Jason, who kept their skulls as trophies. I think he had around about 21 skulls in his collection. He got into trouble a lot with the police throughout his teen years for the animal abuse, but it didn't stop there. He also had charges for stalking and harassment. One of his old school teachers would report that Jason would write her very detailed letters and would ring her and explain in explicit detail how he dreamt of killing her. In the weeks prior to the murder, Jason Massey had been released from prison after serving an animal abuse charge. In July 1993, when this case takes place, he was out driving with one of his friends when he decided to go to Christina's house. Jason had groomed the 13-year-old girl and convinced her to sneak out one night to meet him, and that is exactly what happened on the 27th of July. Christina would sneak out of the house to meet Jason, and Brian went along with her, and horrifically, just hours later, both of the children would be dead. Jason had actually told his friend in detail what he was planning on doing to Christina. He was going to assault her, torture her, mutilate her, and then kill her. But this friend didn't take Jason's claim seriously because this was the type of thing that he would always talk about. He hated women. And so when he spoke about doing these awful, horrific things, no one thought anything of it. When Jason Massey was arrested after witness testimony and DNA helped to catch him, he would smile as he was placed into handcuffs. He would go on to be found guilty of capital murder, and it took the jury only 15 minutes to recommend that he receive a death sentence, which he did. He would sit on death row for around about 7 years alongside another infamous serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas. August. For the barbaric murders of Christina Benjamin and Brian King, Jason Massey would be executed on the 3rd of April 2001 by lethal injection. His final meal consisted of fried chicken, fried aubergine, spinach, broccoli, cabbage, snap peas, fried squash, caramel ice cream, broccoli cheese, and sweet tea. During his final statement, Jason took full accountability for what he'd done and apologised to the family. His statement said in part, quote, "I want you to know I'm sorry for what I have done. I want you to know that Christina did not suffer as much as you think she did. I know you guys want to know where the rest of her remains are. I put her remains in the Trinity River." The river would be searched shortly thereafter, however Christina's remains weren't recovered. After all of these years, it's likely that they have washed far away.
They lured a young girl into the woods and brutally killed her, sacrificing her to Satan. They believed that sacrificing a virgin to the devil would push their death metal band into fame. So they stabbed her several times in the head and neck with a hunting knife. So you might be thinking that I'm talking about the horror movie Jennifer's Body, but sadly, I am not. This is Elise Poller, and in 1995, she was violently killed by her 3 classmates. They were in a death metal band called Hatred. So many people think Elise's case is what inspired the movie Jennifer's Body, which is about an indie band who kidnaps and murders a girl who they believe is a virgin. They do this because they made a pact with the devil to sacrifice a virgin, all in hopes of becoming a super famous band. But after the ritual fails, they realize that she wasn't actually a virgin, and that mistake is what turns her into this demonic, violent creature who goes on a gory killing spree. While the creator of this movie has never flat out said that Elise's case in real life is what inspired them to write this movie, many people think that the details are too similar to ignore. And I think more people should know the real meaning and symbolism behind Jennifer's Body. So let's talk about it. So like I said, this is Elise Poller. She was only 15 years old when she was suddenly and violently killed in 1995. Elise was a freshman at Arroyo Grande High School in California, and she was described as a vivacious girl with a dramatic flair. She was also super creative, so every single dress she owned was designed and sewed by her. She was incredibly talented, and she had so much life ahead of her that she never got to live, all because of these 3 guys. This is Royce Casey, who at the time was 17 years old. This is Jacob DeLashmit, who was 16, and this is Joseph or Joe Fiorella, who was 15. They all attended the same school as Elise, and they were described as a little bit odd. They were all loners and socially awkward, but they all bonded over their shared love for death metal music. The 3 of them became best friends, and they were all obsessed with the American thrash band Slayer, like so obsessed that they called themselves cult followers of this band. And they specifically loved the songs Altar of Sacrifice and Dead Skin Mask. The first one is about satanic ritual sacrifice and about offering someone up to Satan, aka a virgin, in exchange for power. Dead Skin Mask is about serial killer Ed Gein and his obsession with corpses and human skin. So, you know, heavy stuff. Anyways, they loved Slayer so much that it inspired them to start their own death metal band called Hatred. Although all 3 of them loved this music, and specifically Slayer, it was Joe who was deeply obsessed. He began studying these lyrics and felt like they had this deep meaning. So in the summer of 1995, Joe pitched an idea to his friends Royce and Jacob. He asked them if they would be open to sacrificing a virgin to help them gain fame for their death metal band. Shockingly, Royce and Jacob were totally on board. So they began plotting who their victim would be, when they would do it, how, and all of that. Like, they were so hyper fixated on this new murderous plan that it consumed their entire life. For several months, they plotted their kill until Joe finally recommended a potential victim, 15-year-old Elise Poller. As we know, Elise went to the same school as them, but they weren't close friends or anything like that. This was a pretty small town, and Elise knew of the boys from her broader social circle, but they weren't good friends by any means. But what's super disturbing is that Joe became fixated with her, like obsessed, and he thought she would make a great sacrifice in their ritual because she had blonde hair and blue eyes and was a virgin. How exactly he knew that detail, I don't know. Not only was Joe obsessed with Elise, but he also became obsessed with killing her as well. Fast forward to July 22nd, 1995. That evening, Royce went to a local market with a friend to buy some drinks. There, he randomly saw Joe and Jacob at a nearby payphone, so he went up to them. Jacob hung up the phone and said, quote, "I just got off the phone with Elise. You know what we're going to do." end quote. So Royce left the friend that he went to the market with behind, and he, Jacob, and Joe all took off for Elise's house. Jacob talked Elise into sneaking out of her house that night to go and smoke weed with them. And to her, this was just a fun, rebellious teenage thing to do. She had no idea what was about to happen to her, or that it was all a part of a satanic sacrifice and ritual. As the boys were walking to her house, Royce saw that Jacob was wearing a belt and that Joe was carrying a 12-inch hunting knife, which would later be used in Elise's murder. And it was at that point that he said he knew that this, killing someone was no longer a hypothetical discussion. It was actually happening, and soon. Once Elise snuck out of her house, the group walked to a eucalyptus grove only a quarter of a mile away from her home. Although this area was super close to her house and neighborhood, the grove was somewhat secluded and hidden because of how many trees were surrounding them. So the group began smoking, and shortly after they got there, Jacob got up and said that he needed to go to the bathroom. In reality, that was not the case. As Elise got distracted by a nearby car driving by, Jacob walked up behind her and began strangling her with his belt. Then all three of them took turns brutally stabbing her multiple times with Joe's hunting knife. They stabbed her several times in the head, neck, and back, but somehow this didn't immediately kill her. As she lay there moaning and crying out for her mom and Jesus on the ground, Royce stomped on her head to silence her. Elise eventually died a very slow death from bleeding out due to her stab wounds. After she was dead, Jacob started pulling off her pants, and he did this because they also talked about S.A.ing her corpse, but Royce stopped him. Instead, they buried her body in a shallow grave and took off for Joe's house. As they walked home, they bragged about what they had just done, and as cars drove by, they would hide behind bushes. Eventually, they were all picked up by Jacob's dad, who just so happened to be out looking for him, but he had no idea what the three boys in his car had just done. It wasn't until the next morning that anyone knew Elise was missing. Her dad remembers telling her goodnight just the night before and watching Elise walk into her bedroom, but nobody had any idea that she snuck out to go hang out with those boys. Her parents knew something was immediately wrong because Elise would never just vanish like this, but everyone at school and even the police thought she just ran away. Sadly, they didn't really put in any effort to actually search for her, so it was like she just disappeared into thin air. Nobody knew that she was laying dead just a quarter of a mile from her home that entire time. Her case soon fell cold, and it stayed that way for 8 months. As time went on, people continued living their lives like normal. This included Joe, Jacob, and Royce, who would often get together for their band Hatred and play music. When they were together, they would all celebrate Elise's murder and talk about how they would all be rewarded for what they had done. They joked that Elise was a trophy for the devil and that their ritual was going to be successful. But according to Royce, guilt slowly started creeping in. Anywhere you went in town, you would see missing person flyers for Elise. And he said that he tried going to school, laughing, and hanging out with friends, but all he could think about were all the things that Elise could no longer do because of him. So 8 months after killing Elise, Royce confessed to a local pastor about what he and his friends did. That pastor then told authorities, and Royce led them to her remains. But at that point, she was partially mummified, so collecting evidence was difficult. Needless to say, all three of the boys were quickly arrested, and soon after, they confessed. They said that they picked Elise because she had blonde hair and blue eyes and was a virgin, so this made her the perfect sacrifice for Satan. Royce said that if they carried out this perfect sacrifice for the devil, they would become more crazy, and it would make them play death metal music better, faster, and harder. By killing Elise in this way, it would make them go professional. This case never went to trial because all three of the boys pleaded no contest to murder. They were facing 7 different charges, including murder and kidnapping, and authorities wanted to pursue additional charges of torture and SA. But unfortunately, due to the state of her remains, they weren't able to determine if Elise was actually SA'd or not. Despite this being labeled one of the most brutal and horrific crimes in the county, each boy was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Because the case never went to trial, it left people in the dark about what their true motivations were, and it scared people because at this point in time, satanic panic had just started to die down. Satanic panic was a widespread moral panic in the 1980s and early 1990s, and it was characterized by baseless fears that organized satanic cults were sexually abusing and murdering children. This panic resulted in false allegations, ruined lives, and wrongful convictions. Not saying that those things didn't actually happen too, but satanic panic was widespread. So that all finally died down, but then this case happened, which sparked this fear about devil devil worship all over again. Elise's parents even tried suing the band Slayer, saying that their songs directly influenced and motivated Jacob, Joe, and Royce to kill their daughter. The lawsuit alleged that Slayer knowingly distributed harmful material to minors, but the judge in this case dismissed everything. There wasn't any legal way that Slayer was responsible for Elise's death. In response to this, Jacob went on to say, quote, "The music is destructive, but that's not why Elise was murdered. She was murdered because Joe was obsessed with her and obsessed with killing her." End quote. What's crazy is that 2 of the 3 people responsible for killing Elise have since been released from prison, like walking free. Both Royce and Jacob were released from prison last summer at 46 and 47 years old. Last summer, authorities believe that they met the criteria required by the state to be paroled. On top of this, 3 separate psychiatric experts deemed at least Royce as a low risk of reoffending. Royce wrote a 46-page letter to the parole board members, basically laying out why he did what he did, what led up to it, and all of that. He said at the time he was an angry, isolated teenager who bonded with the other 2 over their love for death metal music. I guess he and Jacob have since shown remorse over what they did. And 2 of the other main reasons why they were released is because they apparently understood the cause of a crime, and they both had plans for life after prison. Jacob initially blamed what happened mainly on Joe, but he has since acknowledged that he was the real ringleader. He fully admitted that he was the one who physically lured Elise into the woods, and he said that he knows that he's the most responsible for this crime. He said, quote, "Elise was safe in her home that night when she got a call from me." End quote. Even though they've apparently admitted their guilt and remorse, it's still crazy to me that they are now free men walking around in society. What they did was especially heinous and gruesome. So if you see these 2 guys, please just be careful. I want to hope for the best, but you honestly just never know. As part of their release, they can't go back to the county in which this happened, and they can't have any form of communication with Elise's family. I just personally don't think this is fair. On top of Elise no longer being here and having her life stolen, her death greatly affected her family, as one could expect. I mean, this was debilitating pain and grief that they went through. Her dad was once a really successful contractor, but after losing his daughter, he mentally and physically couldn't work for 3 straight years, and as a result, they lost their family home. He still blames himself for what happened to her, because even though she said she was going to bed that night, he feels immense guilt for not going to check on her one last time before going to bed himself. The only one still left in prison is Joe, which is surprisingly somehow controversial. Some people think that it's not fair that he was the youngest out of the other 2 boys who committed this crime, yet he's the only one still in prison. Joe has tried to overturn his conviction countless times, and they've all been rejected. His attorneys argue that Joe is intellectually and developmentally disabled, and had this been brought up back when his charges were being filed, maybe his sentence would have been different. His attorneys think that his case was severely mishandled back in 1995. They describe Joe as this quiet, shy kid who was teased for being slow, and that he wouldn't be able to orchestrate something as sinister as Elise's murder. But according to the parole board and specialists working on this case, as of 2023, Joe has still not shown any remorse for killing Elise, nor has he done any of the work necessary to be paroled. They said, quote, "Joe was dangerous at 15, and he's not any less dangerous now." End quote. I don't know what's going to happen, but his next parole hearing is June 11th of this year. So literally next month. There's a good chance that he could be released, but honestly, my fingers are crossed that he's not. So now that we know all of the details in Elise's case, let's go over why a lot of people think it's what inspired the movie Jennifer's Body. I mean, the similarities are unsettling. A teenage girl, a group of boys obsessed with music and violence, and the idea of a woman's body being treated as something disposable in pursuit of power and fame. While the writers of Jennifer's Body have never publicly confirmed that Elise's case inspired the film, the similarities have fueled speculation for years. What makes those comparisons even more disturbing is the way Jennifer's Body handles trauma and sexual violence. Jennifer isn't born a monster. She becomes one after being exploited and brutalized by people who saw her as an object instead of a person. And instead of being treated like a victim, she's feared, sexualized, demonized, and reduced to what happened to her. That reflects a very real pattern in society, where women who survive sexual assault are viewed as damaged. They're either blamed for their trauma or stripped of their humanity altogether. In my personal opinion, the horror in Jennifer's body isn't just the gory violence. It goes way deeper than that. And that's part of why so many people continue to connect the film back to Elise Polder's case even decades later.
This British serial killer is known as the Man in the Glass Coffin. Robert Maudsley was born on the 26th of June 1953 in Liverpool, and he was one of 12 children. During the first few years of his life, Robert and several of his siblings were placed in an orphanage run by nuns because his parents were struggling to cope. According to Robert, those were some of the happiest years of his childhood, but when he was 8 years old, his parents took them back. He claimed that he was regularly beaten with fists, belts and sticks, and once said, "All I remember of my childhood is the beatings." Robert also alleged that his father sexually abused him. Within a year of returning home, social services permanently removed him from his parents' care and placed him with a foster family. As a teenager, Robert ran away to London, where he became involved with drugs and later turned to sex work to survive. He struggled severely with his mental health, attempted suicide multiple times, and reportedly told psychiatrists that he had violent thoughts towards his parents. Everything would change in 1974. One night, Robert met a man named John Farrell while working as a sex worker. According to reports, Farrell showed Robert photographs of child abuse. When Robert saw this, he remembered his own childhood and he went crazy. He killed him shortly afterwards by strangling him before using a hammer and a knife. He was later declared unfit to stand trial and sent to Broadmoor Hospital. Broadmoor, if you don't know, is a high-security psychiatric hospital in England that houses some of this country's most dangerous offenders with severe mental illnesses. But the John Farrell murder was only the beginning. In 1977, while detained at Broadmoor, Robert and another inmate took a convicted child abuser, David Francis, hostage for several hours before they killed him. Rumours also later spread around that Robert had cannibalised the victim, but it wasn't proven and it was later dismissed, but it was heavily believed at the time. After this killing, Robert was transferred to Wakefield Prison, and 1 year later, in 1978, he killed 2 more inmates in one day. These were Bill Roberts and Salney Darwood. He murdered one of them inside his cell and hid the body underneath the bed, and then he used a homemade weapon on the other one. Afterwards, Robert walked calmly over to a prison officer, placed the weapon on the desk and said, "There'll be 2 less for roll call tonight." By this point, prison officials considered Robert too dangerous to ever mix with other inmates again, so they built him a specially designed solitary cell beneath Wakefield Prison. The reinforced unit is often described as a glass coffin. It measures roughly 18 feet by 15 feet and it contains thick glass walls, constant surveillance and almost complete isolation from other prisoners. Robert has now spent more than 4 decades there. Apparently he spends 23 hours a day alone in the cell and has become one of Britain's longest serving prisoners in solitary confinement. He went on to say that if he'd killed his parents back in the day, he never would have gone on to kill any of these people. He did it because he had such hatred towards his parents and what had happened to him as a child, and when he faced people who'd done other things to children, he just couldn't contain his rage.
This woman stuffs her dead husband into a freezer because she thinks that doctors are going to steal his brain. And as crazy as that sounds, we are talking about this woman right here. Her name's Barbara. She's 67 years old, living in Missouri with her husband Paul. And Paul, he's about 70 years old and unfortunately suffering with ALS. Now, if you don't know, ALS is probably one of the cruelest diseases you could possibly get. It doesn't just get you sick, it slowly shuts your entire body down piece by piece. First, your muscles weaken, then you lose your ability to walk and then to talk, and eventually your breathing stops altogether. So most families, when they're in this nightmare, they turn to hospice care, to doctors, to nurses, anyone who can make these last few days a little less unbearable. But Barbara, oh no, she wants no part of that. She refuses to let any doctor near Paul. And it's not just a little mistrust with hospitals, no, this is like full-blown paranoia. She is fully convinced that they're all evil vultures, just waiting for him to take his last breath so that they can all scoop in and take his organs. Or worse, cut open his skull, steal his brain, and use it for scientific research. And to my surprise, Paul actually agreed with her. He shared that same belief, so it wasn't like Barbara was forcing this on him. They were both in this paranoia together. And because of that, Barbara becomes obsessed with one thing: how to make sure nobody gets access to Paul's body after he's gone. So one day in 2018, she comes up with this really disturbing plan. She's gonna buy a freezer, but not for storage or for food. She is planning to keep Paul's body in that freezer locked away after he passes from ALS. And on December 30th, 2018, that's exactly what she does. Paul unfortunately passes away, and Barbara picks up his body, stuffs him in the freezer, and stores it in her bedroom. But hold on, because this is where the story actually starts getting messy, more than it already was. Because after Paul dies, Barbara doesn't tell a single soul. But remember, Paul was really sick, so normally nurses would stop by and doctors would want updates on how he's doing. But every time someone would go and try to check in with them, Barbara would not let anyone through that front door. And so eventually doctors are like, okay, something is seriously going on here. I mean, is Paul even alive at this point? So they call police for a welfare check. And honestly, this is probably the most unhinged part of this story. Barbara actually pulls Paul out of the freezer. She puts him on top of a wheelchair and just rolls him up to the window. So when officers look into the window, all they see is this frail, sick old man who looks somewhat alive. So instead of, I don't know, asking more questions or even speaking to Paul, they decide to just write in their notes that they saw him alive and kicking. That is actually crazy. So after that welfare check, Barbara just keeps going like nothing happened. Weeks eventually turned into months, and Barbara is still sleeping in that bedroom. I mean, she is just feet away from a chest freezer that is holding the body of her husband. And the wildest part is nobody still doesn't know. Not the doctors who try checking in, not the officers who already came once, not even the neighbors who have probably waved to her across the street. Everyone just thinks that Paul is sick in bed. And so with this newfound confidence that, wow, this is actually working really well, Barbara decides to invite somebody over to her house. I'm sure she was feeling pretty lonely after all these months. And so this person, whoever they are, they come on over and they're just walking around the house, and somehow they stumble upon this freezer. I could imagine it's a bit weird walking into a bedroom and seeing a big white chest freezer. So out of curiosity, they decide to open it. And when they look inside, all they see is Paul's frozen body. Please, what do you even say or do when you come across a frozen body in a freezer? And before they could even process what they're seeing, Barbara comes into the room and threatens them. She straight up says, "I will kill or anyone that you tell if you reveal my secrets." And it didn't really help that Barbara had a lot of guns in her house. So guns plus frozen body in a freezer, yeah, that was enough to keep them silent for a whole year. And by that point, it was really starting to look like Barbara was actually going to get away with this crime. Until this random day in November of 2019. Police are in Barbara's neighborhood, but they're not there for her. They're there for a whole other reason. Apparently somebody has set a building on fire. So officers are walking around, knocking on doors, asking if anyone saw who caused this fire. And that's when the one person who saw Paul's body in the freezer months earlier, the one person Barbara silenced with a death threat, finally says something. So this person pulls one of the cops aside and basically unloads everything. They're like, okay, listen, Barbara has her husband stuffed into a freezer inside that house. I've seen it with my own eyes. And she told me she'd kill me if I ever told anyone. And this poor cop is just standing there, like with a notepad, probably half asleep, expecting to write about fire reports all day. And suddenly some neighbor walks up to them, whispers in their ear and says, "Oh, by the way, there's a frozen body 3 doors down." That would catch you so off guard. But I mean, obviously they're like, yeah, we need to check this out. But here's the thing. The witness doesn't just tell them about the freezer. They also warn police that Barbara has a whole bunch of loaded weapons inside of that house and that she's already threatened to use them on anyone who dares to come in. So now the cops aren't just thinking, okay, we've got a frozen body situation to confirm. They're also thinking, great, now we might also have an armed standoff with a paranoid 67-year-old woman. So they make sure to get extra cautious. They immediately go out and get a search warrant. All the paperwork, all the backup, everything they need to cover themselves legally and protect them physically. And when they come back, warrant in their hand, all ready to go, they realize Barbara isn't even there. Like, she is gone, which honestly might have been the best scenario. Because the last thing anyone needed was a SWAT-style showdown with grandma ready to protect her frozen husband with a loaded shotgun. So police bust down the front door, they go up the stairs straight to the bedroom, and inside, just like the tipster promised, they find Paul's body frozen solid inside that freezer. And I can only imagine the smell in that room. Like, it's such an unusual place to put it. Typically people would choose a basement. So after police find Paul's body, they immediately launch a massive manhunt for Barbara. And just 2 days later, she is tracked down and arrested. Now, while she's in court, the only thing prosecutors hit her with is felony charge for abandonment of a corpse. Because you have to remember, this technically isn't wasn't murder. Like, the autopsy showed that he clearly passed away from ALS, just like everyone expected him to. But the state is saying, look, you cannot stash your husband into a freezer for nearly a year, refuse every nurse and doctor who tried to check in, lie to the police during a welfare check, and then threaten people who stumble across your secrets. That is still a crime. That is still abandonment of a corpse. In court, she argues that she did not abandon Paul. In fact, she said she was preserving him, that she wanted to keep him close, and that she was simply honoring his wishes. And then comes the part of the story that I swear no one could have predicted. Because in January 2020, just a few months after she was arrested, the whole case was dismissed. The judge takes one look at the charges, abandonment of a corpse, and basically goes, yeah, actually this doesn't technically apply here. And you're probably sitting there like, what do you mean this doesn't apply? She literally kept her husband's dead body in a freezer for over a year. How is that not abandonment? But here's the loophole. Under Missouri law, abandonment of a corpse technically means that you've dumped a body somewhere. Like, you left it in a field, you threw it in a dumpster, you ditched it in some public place. But Barbara literally didn't do any of that. She technically never left Paul. She kept him right there in their bedroom. So just like that, Barbara walks free. And just when you think the story's over, Barbara pulls a move that honestly sounds even crazier than the whole story I just told you. Because after walking free, after beating this case on a technicality, instead of quietly disappearing into the background, she decides to fight the state to get Paul's body back. Yes, you heard me correctly. Her argument was that the coroner was holding on to her husband's remains illegally, and that Paul is her property, and that she's worried that they're gonna dissect his brain and use it for research and just violate everything that she and Paul would never allow. So she demands him back so she can continue protecting him. And the court is like, yeah, no, absolutely not. They shut the whole thing down immediately, and they just refuse to give Paul's body back to her. But Barbara, she swears that she will not stop fighting. She says she will keep on pushing until her husband is back in her care. And I just don't know what to do with that. Because a part of me is like, wow, that is love in a twisted way. But the other part of me is like, that's kind of disturbing. Anyways, I love you guys. Mwah. I'll see you in my next video. Group hug.
A 14-year-old disappears, and it takes almost 26 years to get a conviction, but they still don't know where her remains are. Let's talk about Casey McDaniel. Casey McDaniel was 14 years old, living in Milan, Tennessee, with her mother Cindy and her younger brother Jesse. She was going to be a freshman in high school at Milan High School, and she, up to that point, was a really good student. And she was described as somebody who was bubbly, outgoing, fun to be around, and just an all-around good friend. On the night of Friday, August 16th, 1996, Casey went to a back-to-school party at Double Springs Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Afterwards, her friends helped clean up, and they discussed plans to go to a pool party the following day. After that, her mother was at a different party, so an adult drove Casey home. They watched her walk inside, but this would be the last time anybody ever saw Casey. Cindy made it home at about 2 a.m. and she noticed the lights were on, the TV was left on, a snack was laid out. Casey's clothes from the party were left on her bed as if she changed, and the back door was open, but Casey was not home. Cindy did not expect the worst, though. Casey was known to go to sleepovers and stay the night at friends' houses, so that's what she assumed happened. So Cindy went to bed. When she woke up in the morning, she called Casey's best friend to see what time Casey would be home. But her friend said, Cindy, she's not here. So Cindy asked her friend if she could call around to other friends to see where the heck she was, but nobody knew where Casey was. So Cindy filed a missing persons report, and they searched, and they never found Casey. There would be limited updates throughout the years, and in 2017, Searching for Ghosts would put out a podcast episode on Casey McDaniel, and this kind of helped to revive public interest in her case. But no matter how much time passed, the same name kept coming up over and over and over. Finis Hill, who went by Pete Hill. Now, Pete was a giant piece of shit, to put it nicely, honestly. In 2003, he attempted to kidnap a woman at a car wash, and he would later plead guilty to attempted aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. And when he would get out of prison, Cindy would actually go to the FBI and tell them they needed to watch him because she didn't want what happened to Casey to happen to any other child. Now, Casey and her family knew Pete. Casey actually called him Uncle Pete. But Pete was aggressive with women and he was not a good guy. But in the 90s, he wanted to get with Cindy. But Cindy had a boyfriend and she didn't want to be with Pete anyway. So she continuously turned down his advances. And eventually he was getting so aggressive about it that she told him if he didn't stop, she was going to tell her boyfriend about it. And this made Pete angry. Cindy would tell police that the party she went to the night Cindy went missing, when she and her boyfriend arrived, Pete was leaving. But Pete was married and his wife gave him an alibi. Obviously, it was not a true alibi. So when he got out of prison, police actually created a task force to try to get more information out of Pete because they fully believed Pete knew more than what he was saying. They would create a fake social media account pretending to be a young single mother, and they added Pete, who fell for it and accepted the request. And they had this couple months long relationship with Pete where he was admitting to some horrific things. He admitted that he loved essaying women and that he had sex with a 14-year-old twice. Police started to realize that he was probably going to commit another crime against a child and they needed to act fast. So they made plans with Pete to meet up at a hotel so he could get with this woman's minor daughter, and they arrested him at the hotel. In August of 2022, Pete entered a best interest plea to criminal responsibility to commit second-degree murder to Casey and abuse of a corpse. He will serve a 15-year sentence, and part of his plea agreement is he has to work with law enforcement to recover Casey's remains. But that was 2022, and as of May 2026, they have not found Casey's remains. What Cindy thinks happened is Pete went to their house that night looking for Cindy, and he found Casey instead. But he has never admitted to anything. Typically, I have a call to action after my videos on who you can call if you have information, but we all know the person who has the information on where Casey's remains are. They just need to start talking. Thank you for listening to Casey's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime, and if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment or directly message me.
In the span of just 3 years, 2 members of the Carmen family passed away under suspicious circumstances. Years later, 22-year-old Nathan Carmen was looked into after authorities started to think that his stories just were not making sense. It also stood out that should those family members pass away, Nathan would inherit millions. So did Nathan get rid of his grandfather and mother for money, or did he just get caught up in a series of tragic circumstances? Nathan Carmen was born on January 21st of 1994 to his parents Linda and Clark. And when he was a little boy, there were certain things about Nathan's behavior that stood out to the people around him. For example, the fact that he had difficulty with social interactions and pattern-based behaviors. And that made a little more sense when at 5 years old, Nathan was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. If you guys didn't know, Asperger's syndrome is considered to be a part of the autism spectrum. When he was only 10 years old, his parents got a divorce, and the remainder of Nathan's childhood continued to feel like he was facing challenge after challenge. At school, specifically in high school, Nathan experienced a lot of bullying and he had trouble making friends. Where he did find comfort though was within his horse, a horse that he had that he named Cruz. Cruz was everything to Nathan. They had a very close, deep bond, but when Nathan was around 16 years old, his horse Cruz passed away. And losing Cruz triggered what Nathan's mother referred to him as having a quote psychotic episode while he was at school. And I feel like that was quite the significant event in Nathan's life because it felt like afterwards he retrieved even further. Not wanting to talk to anyone, not wanting to see anyone, he actually ended up running away from home. He eventually did come back, but point being, he ran away. Following that, he moved out of his mom's house and into a camper parked outside. So he wasn't technically living with his mom anymore. They were not underneath the same roof, but he was still on his mom's property. And the relationship that Nathan had with his mother, Linda, I would say was intense and complicated. She was protective of him. She saw help for him. And in her eyes, she was just being a caring mother. But in his eyes, she was overprotective and smothering. After his parents got divorced, Nathan's father ended up moving away. So he wasn't really in the picture. So it was pretty much just him and his mom, kind of. Because another person that was really present in Nathan's life when he was growing up was his grandfather. When Nathan was born, he was the first grandson of millionaire real estate developer John Chocolos, and the relationship that Nathan had with his grandfather was a pretty close one. They saw each other pretty regularly. John played a pretty active role in Nathan's life, and even more so when his father pretty much left the picture. And because John had a lot of money, he doted over Nathan. He paid for his schooling, his housing, giving him everything that he could have ever wanted and needed. He was also the one to buy Nathan that camper in which he lived in outside of his mother's house. He also eventually paid for an apartment for him. His grandfather was kind of the buffer, the peacemaker in between the rocky relationship that Nathan had with his mom. But those two people in Nathan's life, his grandfather and his mother, would be the very two people who would pass away under suspicious circumstances. On December 20th of 2013, 87-year-old John Chocolos was found deceased in his own home. It appeared that someone had entered John's bedroom while he slept and 3 times at close range, deliberately and intentionally. When the investigation into his very tragic death began, one thing was clear, and that was that whoever did this on purpose. Immediately, police suspected Nathan, and for a few reasons. First one being that Nathan was the last person to see John alive. He was with him that night, but eventually ended up leaving and went back to his house. But even bigger than that was the fact that the weapon used on John matched the exact kind of weapon that Nathan had just recently bought. There was also no sign of forced entry, leading investigators to believe that whoever entered John's bedroom that night had access to the house. And I'm not 100% sure how true this is, but some reports also state that Nathan's internet search history leading up to the tragedy was also very concerning, including phrases such as how to commit murder and searches about inheritance law. And that's important to know when you learn that Nathan stood to inherit a lot of money from his grandfather's estate, some reports listing it to be over $500,000. He wasn't the only one getting money by any means, because his grandfather had left well over $40 million. That would be split between all the family members, but still important to note. However, all of that, even though it was more than enough to raise some eyebrows, all of it was circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors did not have enough to charge Nathan with anything. The weapon was never found. There was really no physical evidence linking Nathan directly to the crime scene. No witnesses, no confession, nothing really. So Nathan inherited the money, the case went cold, and that was that. Now we get to September 17th of 2016, 3 years after losing his grandfather. Nathan Carmen was now 25 years old, and he now owned a boat. A 31-foot boat that he named the Chicken Pox. It was actually a boat that he had purchased with the money that his grandfather had left behind. That day in September, Nathan wanted to go fishing, and he wanted his mother Linda to go with him. Linda wasn't particularly excited about the idea. She really wasn't into fishing, but Nathan insisted on getting her to come. Come to find out, Linda's 3 sisters, so Nathan's aunts, had warned Linda not to go on the boat because they did not trust Nathan. All 3 of them actually believed that Nathan was the person responsible for John's passing, but despite their concerns, Linda agreed, and off she went to go fishing with her son Nathan. On September 17th, they left from a Rhode Island marina. Their plan was to go deep sea fishing, and their plan was to stay out in the sea overnight. And we don't learn this until later on, but it turns out that before the trip, Nathan had made some adjustments to the boat. He had removed 2 trim tabs, which from my understanding, they were stabilizing devices that help keep the boat level and steady. When he was questioned about this later, he couldn't really give an explanation as to why he decided to do that. Nathan had also recently purchased flotation suits, specialized survival gear designed to keep a person alive in cold ocean water should anything happen. Nathan bought 2 suits, but on the day of the fishing trip, he only took one of them with him. He later claims that he quote-unquote forgot to bring his mother's suit. They headed out to sea, and then according to Nathan, disaster struck. 8 days after Linda and Nathan headed off for their fishing trip, a man spotted something in the water, a small inflatable life raft drifting alone in the ocean. On that raft was Nathan Carmen, very much alive even after 8 days of allegedly being out on sea. However, he was alone. His mother Linda was nowhere to be found. Nathan's story was simple. The boat had started taking on water in the middle of the night. It happened very fast. Nathan managed to get the life raft, and he called out for his mother, but in the darkness and in the chaos, he could not find her. The boat sank. Linda Carmen disappeared into the ocean, and to this day, her body has never been found. Now, to backtrack a little bit, when authorities first called one of Linda's sisters, Nathan's aunts, to inform her that Nathan and Linda were missing, it took all of 1 second for her to say that she was suspicious of Nathan. She did not hold back to authorities, basically saying, look, I'm not surprised that they're missing, and I guarantee you that Nathan is going to come back, but he's going to come back alone, and my sister will not. Even sharing with authorities that back when John was murdered, Nathan Carmen was the prime suspect, and telling them that that exact week, the week that they went off for their fishing trip, was the week that John's estate was settled, and not only was Nathan set to inherit a lot of money, but his mom Linda was also set to inherit millions. She was making it more than clear that she did not trust Nathan, and that was kind of the first thing that led investigators to pay very, very close attention to Nathan's behavior after he was eventually found. As investigators examined and ran through Nathan's Nathan's story, red flags seem to be appearing everywhere. For example, the life raft that Nathan escaped in was surprisingly well stocked, almost as if he had prepared for an external survival situation out in the sea. For someone that claimed that the sinking of the boat happened suddenly and unexpectedly, Nathan was remarkably prepared. The things that he had changed about the boat prior to leaving also bothered investigators, leaving them to wonder why he would be removing the trim tabs. Naval experts confirming that that would only make the boat less stable and more likely to sink. The quote-unquote forgotten flotation suit was also quite alarming, Nathan having bought 2 suits but only taking one out onto the boat, knowing that they were going far offshore into the cold water and staying there overnight. And then there was the money, because if Linda Carmen passed away, Nathan was said to inherit $7 million, money that Linda herself would have inherited that same week from her father, John Chocolos. And like I said, Linda's sisters did not hesitate. They believed that Nathan had gotten rid of their sister just like they believed that he had gotten rid of their father. It did not take long after Nathan was found for the sisters to hire lawyers and begin fighting to prevent Nathan from inheriting anything else at all. Later, however, come to find out that Linda had not left anything to Nathan whatsoever. She had cut him out of his will, specifically leaving a note stating, quote, "I have intentionally omitted Nathan and all of his descendants as beneficiaries under my will," end quote. Also, everything that I told you before about John's murder was coming back up in conversations, and Nathan Carmen was not looking good, to say the least. For years following Linda's disappearance, so between 2019 to 2023, Nathan was being looked at as a suspect as the investigation continued. After his mother disappeared and the boat along with her, Nathan filed an insurance claim and collected $85,000 for the boat. But it was kind of starting to feel like the criminal case connecting him to John's murder and Liz's disappearance had hit a wall, but Linda's sisters were not giving up, and in 2019 they won a significant victory in probate court. A judge ruled that because of the many questions in the case, Nathan could not and would not inherit from his mother's estate. It wasn't a criminal conviction by any means, but it was the first time that official legal authority had declared that Nathan could have had something to do with Linda's disappearance. And then fast forward to May of 2022, nearly 6 years after Linda vanished, federal prosecutors charged Nathan Carmen with first-degree murder of Linda Carmen and multiple counts of fraud for collecting insurance money. Nathan pleaded not guilty. His defense attorneys arguing that he had Asperger's syndrome, which made him socially awkward and unusual, but not a murderer. They insisted that the boat sinking was a genuine accident, claiming that the adjustments that Nathan had made on the boat were amateur attempts at boat improvement, not an intention or a plan to get rid of his mother. The trial was set, and finally, after nearly a decade, in some people's opinion, because believe it or not, this case is controversial, but finally, it seemed like Nathan Carmen would finally be facing justice. But then on June 15th of 2023, guards at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in Connecticut found 29-year-old Nathan Carmen unresponsive in his cell. He was gone, deceased before the trial could even begin. For Linda's sisters, there would be no closure, there would be no trial, no verdict, no conviction. Like I said, Linda Carmen's body has never been found, the weapon used to murder John has never been recovered, and the $7 million estate to this day, from what I gathered from my research, remains in legal proceedings. Like what? I was actually about to tell you my opinion on this case, but I kind of want to see where you guys stand on it before I tell you. Anyway, that is all I have for today. Let me know your thoughts on this. I actually really want to know what you guys think happened, what is true, what is not. But yeah, thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Also, you guys, so many comments about my videos being blurry. I don't know if something's wrong with my Wi-Fi. I don't know, but I do know that immediately after I post, for the first like 20 minutes or so, because my videos are so long, they're usually blurry at the start, but I think later they get better. I don't know. Let me know though. If you're watching this, like if this video has been up more than 30 minutes and it's still blurry, please let me know. But also it's gonna stress me out. Okay, love you, bye.
This is the most disturbing interrogation footage that I have ever seen. They thought that he was guilty of murder, so they interrogated him for hours, not knowing that he had a bullet in his head and was dying right in front of them. In 2006, 18-year-old Ryan Waller and his 21-year-old girlfriend Heather Kwan were living together in a house that they were renting in Phoenix, Arizona. Heather was a student at Arizona State. She had dreams of going to law school and becoming a defense attorney. Heather was the kind of girl that always wanted to help everyone, and she even volunteered as a big sister for the Big Brother, Big Sister program. She was extremely loved by her family, her friends, and her boyfriend Ryan, who called her the light of his life. Ryan Waller was an only child, and he was very close with his parents. He was very passionate about music, and he had big dreams of either becoming a rock star or starting his own company. Ryan had just recently graduated high school. He had been dating his girlfriend Heather for 8 months, and they just moved in together. And Ryan and Heather should have had this great life together ahead of them. On Christmas Day 2006, Ryan and Heather had plans to have Christmas dinner over at Ryan's parents' house, but they never showed up. And her family and his parents couldn't get a hold of either of them the entire day, which was already really strange, but it was even more concerning considering that it was Christmas. So around 8 p.m., Ryan's parents decided to drive over to their home and check on them, see if they're okay. They're knocking on the door and they're getting no answer. So they eventually called the police requesting a welfare check. But it took officers over 3 hours to arrive at Ryan and Heather's house to perform that welfare check. When they finally do arrive, they're knocking on the door, but they're also not getting an answer. So they're peering through the windows with their flashlights because it's dark. And that's when they see that there's a dead body lying in the living room. Even though that alone should have given officers the right to just barge into the home, they waited another hour to get a search warrant. And while trying to pick the lock for the back door of Ryan and Heather's home, that's when Ryan himself opened the door. And now everyone was really confused. You might also be confused. This part is kind of confusing, but I promise it'll all make sense very soon. 21-year-old Heather Kwan was tragically found dead inside on her couch, and she was killed from a single shot to her head. Her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ryan, was found in the home with her body. He wasn't answering the door for anyone, and he was covered in blood and bruises. And he honestly just overall looked to be in really bad shape. So right away, officers get tunnel vision. They think that Ryan killed his girlfriend. That's how he got all the bruises all over his face in the struggle. And he wasn't answering the door for anyone because he was trying to find a way to cover this up. Officers start screaming at Ryan to get down on the ground, but he seems genuinely confused and he just keeps asking what's going on over and over again. Police slam 18-year-old Ryan down on the ground and they handcuff him. They then bring him out and put him in the back of a police car. But instead of immediately driving Ryan to the police station to be questioned, they just leave him in the back of the police car for 4 hours as they finished processing the crime scene. And despite paramedics being on the scene and Ryan clearly being injured, not once was Ryan ever checked out. And after multiple hours, Ryan was finally brought down to the police station to be interrogated for his girlfriend's murder. And from the very beginning, it was very clear that there was something wrong with Ryan. While Ryan's alone in the interrogation room, he handcuffs himself to a table, but only moments later seems to forget he did that and he tries to get up and walk away. He then picks up a piece of paper that's on the table and he reads this paper for several minutes, even though that piece of paper was completely blank. And Detective Paul Dalton comes in to question Ryan for Heather's murder. Ryan seems really confused and he can't remember what happened or why he's even there. Ryan also can't remember simple facts about himself. He says that he never graduated high school. He says that the furthest he got in school was 8th grade. When the detective asks him what was like the largest grade that he ever went to in school, he says letter B, when he's meaning like grade as in like 8th grade, 10th grade, not like the letter grade. And all of this is completely wrong because Ryan just graduated high school.
What's the highest grade you went through school?
I don't know.
You don't know the highest grade you went through?
8th?
8th grade? Did you graduate?
Yeah.
Do you have a GED?
I don't know.
What's the highest grade that you completed?
B?
Not grade, as in letter grade. I'm asking, did you graduate high school?
No.
And the highest you went was 8th grade?
Ryan also seemingly forgets everything about his girlfriend Heather. He can't remember her last name. He gives a wrong last name, and then he also gives a wrong age. He says his girlfriend's 16 or 17 when she was actually 21 years old.
Do you have a girlfriend? No? You know a girl named Heather?
Mm-hmm.
You know Heather's last name?
Mm-hmm.
What is Heather's last name?
The one that lives there right now?
I guess, I don't know. If her name's Heather, what's her last name?
I don't know which name she's trying to use as her last one. She's trying to have a real last as her nickname, so I don't know.
What nickname does she go by?
She probably wants the last name, Kyman.
Kyman? How old is Heather?
16 or 17.
Ryan and Heather had a roommate named Alicia who was not there that day. Not only does Ryan not really remember Alicia when they ask about her, but he also says that him and Heather were there that day with some woman named Christina. And as far as I know, they didn't know anyone named Christina. On multiple different occasions, Ryan has a different answer on how he got the bruises on his face. He said that Heather did it, and then he said that Christina did it, and then he said that Alicia did it.
What happened to your face?
I don't know.
You told the officer just a few minutes ago that someone hit you. Do you remember who hit you?
I don't know. I think it was Heather.
Why would Heather hit you?
I don't know. It was an accident. I forgot why.
What was an accident?
Heather's last name?
No. What was an accident?
Heather hitting me.
What did she hit you with?
Her hand in the eye.
Did you guys have an argument?
Not really, no.
Not really? What happened for her to hit you in the eye like that?
She just hit me on accident. She was giving Christina a head.
She was what?
She was helping Christina with her hair or something. I don't know.
Who's Christine?
She's on the couch.
Christina's on the couch? What's Christina's last name?
I don't know.
What does she look like?
I really don't know.
You don't know? What happened last night?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I really don't. I just want to go to sleep and go to sleep. Oh.
Well, you remembered Heather hitting you in the eye, right?
I don't remember after that because I just went to lay down and try to go to sleep.
Alright.
I don't know what anybody was doing. I really don't.
Who was in the house when you went to sleep?
Christina and Heather.
Christina and Heather. Okay. And Christina was on the couch?
Heather was.
Heather was on the couch. You told me Christina was on the couch just a minute ago.
I don't know, man. I really don't. I really don't.
You just don't know?
I really don't, man.
Or you don't want to tell me?
I really don't know, man. I really don't. I just want to go and go to sleep, man.
Alright, you're not going to go anywhere. You're all beat up. Right? So tell me what happened.
I don't know. I just want to go to sleep, man. That's it.
Remember what happened to your nose? There's a big chunk out of your nose.
I don't know.
And the reason that Ryan is acting so strange in this interrogation footage is because he actually was shot twice in the head and currently had a bullet and skull fragments lodged into his brain. So we're going to rewind a little bit so I can tell you what happened on that tragic Christmas day. Before Ryan and Heather moved into their home, the home was being occupied by a man named Eric and Eric's roommate, Richie Carver. Richie Carver had a long criminal history of violence dating back to when he was in middle school. When Richie was only 17 years old, he stabbed a man and stole his wallet, and then he spent 4 years in prison for armed robbery before being released in 2005 and moving into his home with his roommate Eric. At some point, Eric kicked out his roommate Richie Carver, and that's when Ryan moved in and took Richie's place in the home. As far as I know, Richie, Ryan, and Heather barely even knew each other. But Richie became so obsessed and he kept showing up to the home all the time, even after his roommate Eric moved out and Ryan's girlfriend Heather moved in. It's believed at some point Richie came over to pick up his mail or the rest of his belongings, and he saw that Ryan and Heather had a lot of expensive belongings, and he decided that he was going to rob them, and he thought that it would be the perfect crime because he already used to live there, so he knew the layout of the home. He knew how to break in through the back door without a key, and if any of his DNA or his fingerprints were found in the home, it would make sense because he recently lived there. So on Christmas Day 2006, before Ryan and Heather went over to Ryan's parents' house for Christmas dinner, they were just sitting in their home watching a movie when Richie Carver and his father Larry Carver broke into their home. They weren't expecting anyone to be there because it was Christmas, so when Richie saw Ryan, he fired 2 shots at Ryan's face. face. First bullet just grazed the side of Ryan's head. The other one went through his nose, out the other side of his nose, into his eye, and lodged into his brain. Ryan fell unconscious, and Richie and his father, Larry, thought that Ryan was dead. So that's when they moved on and they found Heather, who was cowering in fear on her couch, and they shot her once in the head at point blank range, killing her. They then robbed the place and immediately got out of there. It wasn't until police were trying to pick the back lock to gain access into the home that Ryan finally regained consciousness and he opened the door. But because he was shot twice, he had a bullet and skull fragments lodged into his brain. He was very confused and he didn't know what was going on. And because of his brain damage, he couldn't remember at the time what happened to him. So now that you know what is currently going on with 18-year-old Ryan Waller in this interrogation footage, it makes it so incredibly hard to watch. But eventually, Ryan actually does start to remember what happened, and he tells the officers that he was shot by Richie and Richie's dad. He's still kind of confused. Like, at first he says that they were shot with bow and arrows, but he's telling the detectives that he was shot, and he says who shot him and Heather, but the detective questioning him does not believe him. He's literally telling this officer that he remembers that he was shot in the face, and the officer does not believe him and just continues questioning him.
There's a dead girl in your living room.
She's dead?
Yes.
Heather?
I don't know. I want to know what happened in your house last night.
The girl on the couch is dead?
I don't know if she's on the couch. She's dead.
These people came over, Richie and his dad, with arrow, bow, and darts. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
They hit me and her with those. That's it. And Heather wasn't there. And Eric wasn't there. It was just me and Heather. What was there?
You and Heather were there. And then what happened?
And that's it. Richie and his dad tried to break in through the back.
Richie and Dad? His dad?
Mm-hmm.
Who's Richie?
I don't know.
Well, you obviously know him. You know his name by Richie.
He used to live there.
Was he a roommate of yours?
He used to be.
And they hit you and they hit you?
Yeah.
Now it's Richie that hit you, not Heather?
No, Richie and his dad.
Richie and his dad. They hit you.
Yes.
Why?
Because they're trying to get their stuff. I don't know why.
And they had some kind of bow and arrows?
Mm-hmm. They each had 2 revolvers and they didn't let off any shells.
Okay, you just said they had bow and arrows. Now they have revolvers?
That's what I meant. They have revolvers.
They have revolvers.
Yes. And then they shot us with those.
They shot both of you?
Yeah.
Where'd they shoot you at?
I got shot in the eye.
You
I
got
think-
shot in the eye
I think so.
with a revolver.
I think. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Then what happened?
I don't know.
You don't know a lot, Ryan.
I don't, man. I really don't.
Did you shoot Heather?
Mm-mm.
Ryan, why don't you tell me what really happened there? Because I don't believe.
I really don't know, man. I really don't. I don't know. I can tell you anything, I swear.
Well, I want you to tell me the truth. That's all I want.
Richie and his dad came there. And I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know why, but then, man, I really don't. I really don't know.
Okay. You're telling me you're all over the board here, number one. You're saying bows and arrows, you're saying revolvers, and you're saying some other thing, and you're saying they shot you in the eye. Okay? They shot you with a revolver in your eye.
Yes. And that's
Is
it.
it a BB?
No, it was a real gun, man. It was just a
If they
revolver.
shot you in the eye with a revolver, you wouldn't be talking to me right now.
How do you know?
It was most likely you be dead.
That's what I thought too, man. I really don't know.
Okay?
I really don't know, and I just want to go back to sleep and try to go back to bed.
You're not going back to bed. Okay? That's not gonna happen.
Alright, but what happened, man? What do I gotta do? Just tell me what I gotta do.
All right, get your feet off my chairs, number one. Number two, what happened to Heather?
I don't know, man. I really don't
You're
know.
now saying Richie and his dad shot Heather.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Yes.
And he shot her with a revolver.
Yes.
When Detective Dalton finally takes a better look at Ryan's face and sees that there's multiple bullet holes in his face, through his nose, out the other side, and in his eye, he finally suggests that Ryan should go to the hospital.
Yes.
I got the fire department coming to take a look at it. They're going to probably take you to the hospital.
You taking me to the hospital?
Yeah, we're going to take you to the hospital.
Why?
Well, if you've seen your face and the way you're doing things, it doesn't make sense right now, okay? We're just going to make sure you're okay.
I just want to go back to bed, man.
Well, that's the problem. If you have some kind of head injury, you shouldn't be sleeping, okay? Well, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down. There you go. Captain, you're not going to believe this one.
I can't believe it either. You're right. I've already heard the story. I can't believe it. Oh,
This is just my observations that this might be an entrance, this might be an exit, this might be into his eye. And he's acting like he has a serious head injury, which would make sense.
I might have been I don't know. I really don't know.
While are you waiting on this to do more
I don't know.
It looks like it went right through, huh?
Yeah.
Ryan was finally brought to the hospital after it took officers over 4 hours to gain access to his home. He spent another handful of hours sitting in the back of a police car, and then he spent another handful of hours being questioned by the police while he told them what happened to him. At the hospital, Ryan was in critical condition. He lost his left eye. He had a severe infection that they had to treat before he even went into surgery. He had severe brain bleeding, severe brain swelling. His jaw was also broken from when police slammed his face into the ground to handcuff him. And at no point while Ryan was in the hospital for over 30 days did any member of the Phoenix Police Department go in to question him or check on him. And after spending over 30 days in the hospital, 18-year-old Ryan was finally released into his parents' care. Sadly, due to the extent of his injuries, he would never be able to care for himself, and he suffered from extremely severe seizures that were directly caused by being shot in the head. Ryan broke multiple bones that he got during his seizures. During one of his seizures, he bit off half of his tongue. After another seizure, he had to get 40 stitches in his face, and then tragically, Ryan suffered another seizure while he was at the grocery store. He fell so hard down on his head that it caused a brain bleed, and Ryan tragically passed away at only 27 years old. These seizures were directly caused by Ryan being shot, and most medical professionals agree that it's very likely that Ryan Waller would have a much better chance of still being alive today if the police had gotten him medical attention sooner. It took several weeks after Ryan Waller told the police that Richie Carver and his father shot him for them to arrest 23-year-old Richie. And it took another week after that for them to arrest Richie's father, Larry, and Larry was only arrested after his wife kind of turned him in. His wife went to the police and said that her husband confessed to her what he did. And if you're not already angry, wait till you hear this. When Richie's father, Larry, was arrested, during that arrest, he was injured by a police dog. And before they questioned Larry, they brought him to the hospital so his injuries could be treated. The father and son were meant to have a joint trial, but 3 days before the trial, Larry's wife took back her story and refused to testify against her husband. Spouses in this country have the right not to testify against their husband or wife, and they cannot be compelled to do so if they don't want to. Larry's son, Richie Carver, was found guilty and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but it really looked like his father, Larry, would never see a day in court and full justice would not be served for Heather and Ryan. So Heather's family fought to have a law passed called Heather's Law. This law provided an exemption to the spousal privilege to not testify against your husband or wife if the spouse voluntarily provided information to the police. So when this law was passed, Larry Carver went to trial and he was also found guilty and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in 2011. Ryan's family wanted the city of Phoenix and the Phoenix Police Department to take some sort of responsibility for their son's death, but the city and the police department refused to take any responsibility or admit that they were negligent. So Ryan's family filed a lawsuit, but sadly their case was dismissed 3 weeks before the trial. And Detective Dalton, that interrogated Ryan in now infamous interrogation footage, faced zero consequences. No consequences at all. And he also claimed in his deposition that he did not think that Ryan's injuries were serious enough for him to have to see a doctor, and he did not notice the holes in his face. But that interrogation footage proves that that is a lie.
You should go to the doctors, or you should go.
Me?
Yeah.
Why? That?
Yeah.
Is it bad?
I'd say that's really bad. Remember what happened to your nose? There's a big chunk out of your nose.
I don't know.
Ryan's family urges the public to not forget about Ryan and Heather and urge the public to keep talking about their story in hopes that it will pressure the city and they will finally get their day in court. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to the end of Ryan and Heather's story. Please drop me like pink or blue emojis in the comments so I know that you made it to the very end. So extremely interested to hear all your thoughts on this one. I already have a pretty good idea, I believe, on how the comments will go, but so extremely interested to hear all your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. But while you're there, please always remember to be respectful, because someone that actually knew Ryan and Heather in real life might be in the comments. You actually never have any idea who's ever reading your comments, so please always remember to be respectful. Thank you to every single one of you that suggested that we cover this story today. Let me know what case you want to see me cover next, and until then, I will see you guys all in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.